Welcome to this Pro-Cons Enrichment Elective session, Live Locally, Act Globally. I think all of you know me, but I'll introduce myself again. My name is Leah Garber, and I'm Vice President for Israel Engagement at JCCO Association in North America. And joining me here today from JCCA is my dear colleague, Gabby Cordova, a Development Assistant and Board Liaison. And it's wonderful to have Gabby here with us. Our names, Gabby and my name, appear as hosts at the top of your participant list, so you can chat with either of us to address any questions or needs, but also if you have questions, the easier is just to raise your hand. Please note that this session is being recorded. We understand that some people may not wish to be recorded, and then in which case you may turn off your camera. Though we encourage everyone to please turn on your camera so we could see you and we could feel that we're actually in a real conference together. Autumn put her beautiful shirt on, so we want to make sure that this is a real gathering. And if this is not the session that you intended to join, please return to SPOTME and select the one that you are planning on joining. As you know, we aspire for every person to feel they belong at ProCon 21, and we're working to build an inclusive spaces in which all people feel welcome, respected, safe, and fully included. So to that end, we encourage you to consider the following suggestions as we begin our time together. Feel free to rename yourself and add your name, agency, and if you're comfortable, also adding your preferred personal pronouns. And we have enabled closed captioning, but if you have the option to turn it off using the bottom toolbar. We are so thrilled and grateful to offer this multifaceted conference at no cost to our GCCs. And I'm sure that you heard the number of over 30,000 of you GC professionals are joining us this week. And this is made possible thanks to our very generous ProCon 2021 sponsors. Each sponsor believes in the GCC movement and the incredible work GCCs accomplish day in and day out. Their representatives are proud to be with us to share their expertise and offerings. And we hope you will join us in showing appreciation for their support by visiting their booth, their virtual booth, obviously, in our virtual vendor hall. We also encourage you to connect with them anytime during the conference and beyond. During the conference, you can use the chat feature to connect with them. And after the conference, you could reach out to them using their contact information that is listed on our site. And now I am so excited to introduce our session's topic and speaker. As we and our peers encounter the daily health ramifications and anxieties of COVID-19, how often do we stop to think about how this global pandemic affects those that are already enduring other humanitarian crises? Crises such as conflict, turmoil, forced migration, cyclones, earthquakes, etc. Our friends at IsraAID, they do. Our session today will introduce you to IsraAID. IsraAID is one of Israel's leading humanitarian aid organizations. Their outstanding work in general, and especially this past year when they responded to several humanitarian crises, including the Venezuelan refugee crisis and cyclones in Mozambique, to name a few. And they did all this simultaneously, including COVID-19 related crises in 16 countries. Now, on top of sharing with you the wonders and beautiful of IsraAID's work, it's also a very hands-on session for you, because it will provide GCC professionals some programmatic ideas for your GCCs on themes like tikkun olam, humanitarian aid, Israel expertise and impact, and the nexus among all three. So really, when you are following the presentation, try to also think how you can take this back to your GCC and bring Israel through the work of IsraAID. I also want to add that personally for me, as an Israeli citizen, seeing IsraAID's outstanding work all over the world, including at countries that Israel cannot mention that they're working with because there's no diplomatic relationship with. And personally, I also had the privilege to visit with IsraAID's leadership at one of the refugee camps in Greece and seeing them in action. All of this adds great pride to my Israeli identity. And I'm so grateful that we have such wonderful people that are sharing the beauty of Israel across the world. Professionally, I'm involved with IsraAID as part of JCC Association's long-standing partnership through our J Response initiative. This partnership includes J Response training, sessions, speaking at different opportunities like today, and more. So leading this session is Rachel Wallace from coming us from California. Rachel is the Director of Outreach and Engagement at IsraAID. She oversees IsraAID community and university partnerships, programs, and events, and directs IsraAID's humanitarian fellowship. Please note that Rachel's full bio appears on SpotMe, and you're welcome to check it out. So with that, I'm thrilled to turn this floor over to Rachel. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Leah, for that beautiful introduction. And of course, Gabby, for helping, of course, implement this conference and for bringing me today. I'll first start off by saying that we have had a very long partnership with JCCA, and we are very proud of our work with them, as well as individual JCCs that we have worked with over the years, from California to Arizona, East Coast, West Coast, to bring engaging programming to JCCs, as Leah mentioned, around Israel, around humanitarian aid, tikkun olam, refugee response, etc. So today, actually, what we're gonna do is first actually start with a little bit of an overview of IsraAID. Just out of curiosity, by show of hands, have people here heard of IsraAID, or is this your first time? So, okay, some and some. So I'll start off by saying that IsraAID is Israel's leading humanitarian aid organization. So often you hear that Israel is the first country on the ground to respond to a natural disaster, to respond to a refugee crisis, to respond to health crises in the world, and most of the time that's actually us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What we're going to do today is start with an introduction on IsraAID, zoom in into a couple areas of our unique Israeli expertise that we use all over the world when responding to crises. And then we're actually all going to respond to a crisis together. And we'll conclude actually by ways that you can bring other sorts of IsraAID programming and activities to your own JCCs. Great, so I think everybody should be able to share my screen. First of all, IsraAID. So unlike actually USAID or UKAID, we're actually a nonprofit private organization that's not part of the government. And we respond all over the world to natural disasters, refugee crises, health epidemics, and also post-conflict situations. And as Leah mentioned, also, we've even been in countries that don't have diplomatic ties to Israel, because for us, our mission is solely to help people, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, because those are really the values of our country and of our people. We not only respond to the emergency needs after a crisis, but the long term. So often we stay in a country for 2 years, 5, sometimes even up to 10 years, depending on what people on the ground really need. Because probably it might sound obvious that people can't rebuild after just a few weeks. Sometimes it can take years and years for people to be able to build back after a crisis. We were founded in 2001, so we've been around for about 20 years responding to humanitarian crises. And we've been in 55 countries since our founding, currently in 16, responding to not only COVID-19, but also crises that predated that. So I'm actually going to start with video. follow-up from that video. So what makes IsraAID unique, right? There are a lot of humanitarian aid agencies in the world. So what's special about IsraAID? First of all, our attitude and approach. So probably, I know many of you are Israelis on today's session. So you know about Israeli chutzpah, right? And this Israeli mentality. And for us, the question is not if, it's about more about how and more about when, and finding ways to make things work. So first of all, that's really a key part of our approach. It's just this Israeli mindset that we have. And also we take what we call a communities first approach, which is essentially prioritizing local communities on the ground and empowering them. And we see everything that we do as a partnership. So it's not IsraAID coming in and telling people what to do and then leaving. We work very much hand in hand with local community partners on the ground. And we don't implement any field project unless we have a partner. So that might be a local government agency, that might be a local school, that might be a local place of worship, etc. Also, our staff diversity. So also, I would imagine probably most of us here know about the diversity of the state of Israel, and IsraAID staff reflects that. So we have people on our teams around the world who are Israeli Jews, Israeli Arab Muslims, Israeli Arab Christians, Druze, and in addition to our Israeli teams, we also hire local communities, members from the local community onto our team. So for example, in Greece and Germany, we work with refugees that come from the Middle East, and we have hired many of those people onto our staff team. And that's very intentional because that's how we, for example, reach more local community members that we are seeking to work with. And that's also how we know really what the community's needs are and what the sensitivities are and what the cultural needs are. And I'll actually mention that in Lesbos, Greece, Leah mentioned she saw some of our projects in Greece. There was a point where IsraAID actually had the only mother tongue Arabic speaking doctor on the island. And that was one of our Arab Israeli doctors that we had with us. And of course, one other way that makes us unique is the expertise that we bring out of Israel. And I'll highlight a little bit of that today. But first, just so you get a sense, I mentioned we've been in 55 countries since our founding. Today, we are in really across the globe, from the Bahamas, responding to Hurricane Dorian, Greece and Germany, Guatemala, and even in the United States. And I'll touch upon that at the end. So a little bit about the humanitarian sectors. In other words, what are we doing? What does it really look like when IsraAID is in the field and running projects? So this is what we're doing. First of all, protection, or mental health and psychosocial support. So I think also probably most of us here know, unfortunately, about a lot of the terror attacks and the crises that Israel faces within its own borders. And as a result, the country has become an expert in mental health expertise, creative trauma expertise, and they really embody an incredible resilience when it comes to responding to trauma like that. And it's a very Israeli attitude to think, you know what? Okay, we've dealt with these difficulties and hardships. We've emerged from it. We've developed an incredible expertise to respond to it. Now, how can we use this expertise to make the world a better place and use it and provide it to communities all over the world who could benefit from it? And that's exactly what IsraAID does with our expertise. Also, WASH, or water sanitation and hygiene. Also, probably we know that Israel is a leader in water technology and water expertise. So we run a lot of water projects all over the world, and also a lot of WASH education together, because it's very hard to have one without the other, and I'll talk about that. Of course, our educational programs. Many of these, especially children, you can imagine, right, after a natural disaster, their school is destroyed. They might not have access to education, or a refugee who has been on foot sometimes might not have access to education for years. So our educational programs help to catch them up, to get to the speed of where they need to be, to hopefully one day enroll in a school. And of course, our health and medical care, we deploy medical teams after disasters all over the world. So I'm going to zoom in really on our mental health and our WASH expertise. And today you'll also have a chance to apply these different types of expertise when responding to a disaster. So mental health, we provide both the immediate mental health needs as well as the long term. So psychological first aid, this is when we deploy mental health and psychosocial support teams right after a crisis, right after a traumatic event. And you can imagine the shock people have, kind of like right after a terror attack, that immediate kind of shock. People have that same kind of reaction after a big hurricane or eruption or other type of natural disaster. So we deploy psychological first aid experts to help calm people down and mitigate that stress so that they can continue to do whatever they need to do and respond in other ways. Child-friendly spaces, these are also key pieces of our work all over the world. And they're just what they sound like. They are spaces where kids can just be kids, process a lot of the trauma that they might be going through. And IsraAID hires local community members to facilitate creative therapies in these child-friendly spaces and also to run educational programs. So for example, also many of us might know here about Sderot, which is a city in Israel, right on the border with Gaza. So they face a lot of rocket attacks, and for a lot of the children also use a lot of creative art therapy programs, movement therapy programs, etc. And IsraAID actually uses a lot of these same creative therapies in its child-friendly spaces and in its projects all over the world. Expressive relief therapies, which is just what I was talking about, a lot of the creative art and drama and movement therapy, and psychological support for institutions. So a key part of our approach and what makes us successful is that we use a model called training the trainers and helping the helpers, as we like to call it. In other words, who are the people that have access to the masses? Who are the community leaders? Who are the people truly supporting community? Who are the leaders supporting community members? And we make sure to give them the proper trainings and tools and skill sets so that they can run a lot of these psychosocial support programs for their communities. So as mentioned, also WASH, or water sanitation and hygiene. We provide both short-term and long-term WASH programs. So for example, I'll actually start the last one, gravity-based water filtration systems, and I'll show a video about it in a minute. But in Puerto Rico, Vanuatu, some other countries too, IsraAID has installed what's called this gravity-based water filtration system. It's non-electric, doesn't require any kind of electricity, and it's a filtration system that filters water. And in Puerto Rico, actually, the community had access to safe water for the first time that we were working in, thanks to this filtration system that we built after Hurricane Maria. And in the meantime, as we're building this kind of system, which can take a long time, we also provide home-based water filtration systems for people in their own homes, which are meant to be short-term solutions. And of course, you can't just be a standalone project to build something and then leave. We work together with the community to educate them on how to use these water filtration systems. So I'm gonna actually show a case study from Puerto Rico.
And now we're joined by Haley Broder, the country director for IsraAID Puerto Rico. So Haley, what is your mission here?
Our mission here in Puerto Rico is to restore a semblance of normalcy to the island after the devastating Hurricane Maria last September.
So what was the state of this island before you guys got here?
Our team arrived in Puerto Rico 1 week after the hurricane. And when we arrived, there was a complete lack of infrastructure left intact on the island. There were roads completely damaged, trees down. It was lines to get gas, lines to get food, areas in the mountains that were completely cut off from anything. The community that we're working with in El Real had no electricity for 8 months after the hurricane. IsraAID is working in the rural areas in the municipality of Patillas, where we're collaborating with the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico to build a slow sand, gravity-based water filtration system. It's a mouthful, but basically it's a water filtration system that's going to provide this community that was without electricity for 8 months and still is without access to clean, safe drinking water, a way to have clean, safe drinking water go straight into their taps. The way IsraAID works is shifting from an emergency response into the long term. So when we first arrived, we went straight into this rural mountain area that we knew was not being serviced. We're the only NGO that's working in that municipality right now. And we were able to distribute Sawyer water filters to members of that community, where we worked with the community to educate them in Spanish on how to actually use the filters. They didn't just sit in a kitchen cabinet. And then from there, we were able to develop this long-term sustainable solution that is the giant water filtration system that we're building to provide a long-term sustainable impact. It's off-grid, it doesn't rely on electricity, and it's going to be sustainable for years to come.
So we're currently in a town called Barrio Real, which is like an hour south of San Juan, and I'm joined here by Santos, who lives here. Now, Santos, what all has IsraAID been up to in this part of the island?
It's a miracle, because it will give us what we need to have real potable water. They are spectacular people. I mean, they are so helpful, they are so forward in helping people, and they travel the island. It's not only here in Barrio Real in Patillas, but they are all over Puerto Rico that they're involved. We're so grateful that until today we still talk about every single person that have come to Puerto Rico or to help us here in Barrio Real from IsraAID. They bring life. That's
So you got a little bit of a sense from the video. First of all, I just want to underscore that when we're not in Puerto Rico today, but when we were working in an area called Barrio Real, which is a very remote area in Puerto Rico. And the community was so grateful for IsraAID support because as of a very remote area, this community didn't get the type of humanitarian aid attention that they deserve. So actually, many of the community members called people from IsraAID angels when they were working there. And we installed, you can see on the top left, this gravity-based water filtration system. And to get to the top of the system, we hiked through some of these trees all the way to the top of a mountain, and you can see the water filter down. But to operate it, the community doesn't need to climb every day. But just to give you a little bit of a sense of how it works. And today they're still using it even without IsraAID's presence in Puerto Rico. And that's really the point, is that we want communities to be self-sustainable, self-reliant without our consistent need there. We don't want to be this ever-present organization. And in addition to our work installing this water filtration system, we also worked with local schools and also trained them to implement various mental health and psychosocial support programs as well, so that they can then bring those tools and those trainings and those skills to students and local community members that they work with, so that they have tools to respond to future disasters and future hurricanes, because also most of the time, in most of the areas where we work, a natural disaster isn't a one-time occurrence. It occurs often. And another example I want to highlight is in Colombia. I don't know how many are familiar with the Venezuelan refugee crisis, but IsraAID has been responding in Colombia. There are about 5.4 million Venezuelans that have fled. And experts are saying the number of Venezuelan refugees will soon surpass the Syrian numbers. So the situation is very dire. People are leaving political corruption, sometimes violence, also like hyperinflation, where physical money isn't even worth anything anymore, and people can't access basic goods like food, medicines. It's as if they're living in a war zone, even though there technically has been no war. So they're fleeing and they're going to neighboring countries, and about 40% or 2 million out of the 5.4 are trying to settle in Colombia. And that's where we're working. And we're working with people that have really, you know, been through these arduous journeys, no shelter, no food, no place for their children, no schooling for their children. So we actually, in Colombia, we work together with the community to build a child-friendly space, or actually more than one. Now we actually have about 3. And so here's a picture. This was before the pandemic, but we're still running the spaces, still running programming. And actually here's a picture of some of the children that we work with. And since the pandemic, the space has also become a central point to disseminate hygiene supplies, which is critical for COVID-19. And we've also been providing food to children who come to the space, which is critical because in many cases, this is the only food source that children and families are getting, and it's coming from IsraAID. And we hire local community members, local Venezuelans onto our team to prepare it and distribute it. And one more example I'll give before we divide into breakout rooms and respond to a crisis together is in Sierra Leone. You can see on the map where we're talking about. IsraAID actually responded to the Ebola virus, which at the time was one of the most acute public health crises. And the international, the UN and other sorts of international bodies like that were calling on international support because the crisis was just so large and it was unmanageable for local governments in West Africa. And in Sierra Leone, it affected about 4,000 people. So IsraAID deployed a team. We were in Sierra Leone for even after 2016, when the country was officially declared Ebola-free. We stayed running other programs. But the picture on the left, actually, that was our CEO, one of our CEOs at the time, Voni Glick. And so we actually did a couple things in Sierra Leone. We ran actually mental health support trainings and programs and trauma support trainings and programs for healthcare workers. And you can imagine, to be blunt, they were dealing with dead people and dying people from the Ebola virus every day. They're exhausted, they're burnt out, they're stressed, to say the least. So we actually provided these trainings for healthcare workers so that they know that they have a support system too. And they're really the ones dealing with the masses. And we also actually worked with local burial teams actually in Sierra Leone, because we found that the Ebola virus was spreading through burial processes. So we worked with burial teams on how to properly, wash hands and wear proper PPE. A lot of the same things that are coming up now, frankly, during COVID-19, we were focusing on with burial teams in Sierra Leone then. So those are a few case studies of all of our 55 projects from our founding. But so now that you have a background on IsraAID and our WASH and mental health and psychosocial supports, you are now going to be responding to another crisis, Cyclone Idai in Mozambique, that struck in 2019. So I'm going to provide you a little bit of a background on that crisis. And then I think we have a small enough group, or maybe we could just respond all together. But then, so you'll be needing to think about which types of WASH expertise and mental health expertise you'll be using and when. So what would you use after the first week of response, second and third week? So a little bit about, and you'll have about 9 minutes. So a little bit about the disaster. So in 2019, Cyclone Idai made landfall near the port city of Beira with heavy rains, flooding, and mudslides, leaving a wave of destruction not only in Mozambique, but also in Zimbabwe and Malawi, right next door. And you can see from this photo how drastic of a cyclone this was, with thousands of people killed, hundreds of thousands impacted. Many communities experienced heavy losses of crops, livestock, building, and infrastructure. So just to orient us, here's Mozambique, right here on the left, and Beira is right over here. and some useful facts to know as we respond. So due to its long coastline combined with tropical climate, Mozambique frequently suffers from cyclones, floods, and other related hazards. And you also see that there's a relatively short life expectancy and a relatively high poverty rate. So now that you have a background on Cyclone Idai and our work, you should see in the chat, or maybe not. I'm actually going to stop sharing for a second. Right, okay, Gabby posted it. So you should see a Google Doc. And actually, we're a pretty small group, so I think we can just respond all together. So, so what do you guys think? You know, so now that we're an emergency response team on the ground, you're going to have to make some critical choices. And just like in the field, not all types of expertise or not all resources might be available to you right away. You know, that might be due to lack of volunteers right away. It might be due to lack of transportation, might be due to lack of financial resources, a number of factors. So I'll put it to you. If we'll start with mental health and psychosocial support and then go to WASH. So curious, what do you all think? In week one, imagine your IsraAID's emergency response team in Mozambique. After the first week or within the first week, if you can only pick one of these types of areas of expertise, what would you use for the first week?
Rachel, I'm assuming you're inviting people to unmute themselves and respond to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for adding that. So yes, to echo that, please feel free to unmute yourself, share your thoughts. There's no right answer here. And yeah, since we are a small group, we can just stick with one group.
I can go. I would I would assume in the first week I'll do the things that are really like the first one, so like basic first aid and all of that, like the first thing.
So do you mean psychological first aid in this case?
I think so. I mean, I think the other things on the list are just for later. Like it's not necessarily the first thing I would do in general, but out of these categories, yes.
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. We also do a key part of our work within the first week or so right after a disaster. We do provide a lot of emergency relief supplies like food and water, blankets, that kind of stuff. But just for the sake of brevity, since we only have so much time today, I just zoomed in on mental health and WASH. But yes, you do bring up a very important point. And I'll add that during our emergency response, that's also a key way that we get to know local community members and leaders on the ground. So, okay, if we put, is everyone in agreement that we would use psychological first aid the first week? And if you had to pick 2 for the second week, which of these types of psychosocial support would you apply? Any thoughts?
I could be wrong, but it's like, I feel like I would say child safe, friendly spaces and expressive relief therapies for adults in the second week. But in my head, I keep thinking, would they actually do that after such a huge tragedy? Like but then I guess after the first week, possibly, they have to get their children somewhere safe. And I think that would probably be what I would want to do, is see my child in a space where I can deal with things. I would definitely say child safe, friendly spaces for sure.
That's a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up, especially, you know, from the perspective of a parent. They're, you know, dealing with a lot. And something I didn't mention earlier, so I'm glad you just reminded me, is that our child-friendly spaces are also physically safe spaces for children. And in some countries, for example, like Colombia, human trafficking is a problem. So parents also know that in addition to, for example, a lot of the mental health and psychosocial support that we provide and the educational programming that we provide, that their kids are going to be in a physically safe space and they can continue and go about their day and do whatever they need to do.
Then should that be like a week 1 as well? Or no?
What do you guys think? If you can only pick one of these for week 1.
Oh, there's a 1-for-1. I would almost, as a parent, I'd almost think that child safe would be like first. It's like, get your kids somewhere safe. You don't need to worry about them. They're safe. And then the other stuff can happen and the other healing can happen. But for the physical, actual putting your kids somewhere, I think that's pretty important.
Would you let someone take care of your child just right after like a traumatic thing? I don't think you would do that. I don't have children, but I mean, I think you want like to give it a week or something to see like how things turn out. You give the basic first aid care, like what we talked before, and only then you start building something that's more permanent, like spaces. That's my kind of thoughts.
Yeah, that's also, Stav brings up a really good point. And I'll add a couple things. First of all, yeah, it can take some time to get to know a community. You know, it's not like you arrive on scene and the next day, everything's great and perfect. It can take some time. And so that is one of the reasons why we are a long-term focused organization. We stay, as I mentioned before, anywhere, sometimes 2 years, 5 years, could be even up to 10 years in a country. And I'll also add, that's another reason why we hire people from the local community. So to give the Colombia case again, we hired Venezuelan refugees to be part of our staff team. And that's very intentional. That's also so there's a sense of trust and a sense of community. And for us, we see everything we do as a partnership. So just for the sake of time, because we only have a couple more minutes, expressive art therapy, psychoeducation, self-care. What do you guys think? Jess, do you have any thoughts?
I think that education is really important. And I think the sooner you start it, the easier it is for everything else to fall into place. It's interesting because they're all important. You know, if you let the self-care for your first responders get too far out, they get into a circle that can be dangerous too. But I think education, psychoeducation would probably be more important. You would hope that your first responders have the toolkit available, that if they need the help, they can ask for the help. And then you start having that more available later.
Okay, so just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna click these other boxes. But these are all, yeah, really important points, and they're tough to think about when you're in the field. And, you know, as a first responder, again, not all of these a first responder has access to right away and all at once. It could take some time to implement them. And WASH. So if you could choose one activity for week 1, 2 for week 2, and the remainder for week 3. So provision and installation of household water filter and temporary purification, repair of water pipelines, toilets, hygiene education, which we're discovering now is especially important during COVID, and planning and construction of long-term sustainable clean water solutions.
I think provision and installation of household water filters and temporary purification systems should come first, because without clean water, there's nothing.
Okay.
Is there only one for week 1?
Yeah, 1 for week 1.
And then 2 for week 2?
I'd say that toilets and washing facilities
Yeah.
are really important because the damage and disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then the education to come with that too, because if nothing is repaired yet, don't you have to teach them how to use what they have to be safe?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, so for example, with like in the Puerto Rico example, we didn't just install that water filtration system. We worked with the community to teach them and show them how to use it. And yeah, also there's a lot of, especially now all over the world, we've been running a lot of wash education programs, like how to properly wash your hands, you know, how to socially distance, kind of like a lot of what we've been relearning in a way in the States during COVID. So just for the sake of time, then if we put planning and construction of long-term clean water solutions for week 3, water pipelines. So thank you all for sharing. I'm going to actually end with a little bit of an example of what we are doing in Mozambique. This is a response to Cyclone Idai in 2019, and since then there have actually been other cyclones like Cyclone Eloise that we've been responding to as well. I think you should be able to. So before I open it up for any questions, I first of all would just conclude again by saying thank you so much to the JCCA and Leah and Gabby. And following this session, we would love to work with you all. We'd love to work with you to bring content about Israeli humanitarian aid and tikkun olam, etc., to your own JCCs. So a few ways that we can do that following this session. First of all, if you like today's session, we can arrange something similar for your own JCCs, including through speakers, including interactive sessions. You heard, by the way, about some of our projects today. We have an incredible speakers bureau, people of all sorts of backgrounds who have been with IsraAID throughout the world, we can definitely arrange to come speak. And also we have worked with some JCCs to bring a virtual stress relief session. For example, most recently, JCC Boston. And as you heard a little bit today, IsraAID is top notch when it comes to its mental health and stress management and psychosocial support. So since COVID, actually, a lot of our US contacts approached us and asked how IsraAID could help them. So we designed this session. We've delivered it now for thousands of people. So if that's of interest for your JCCs, I'd be happy to speak afterwards as well. And also, if you're interested in more of a long-term partnership, since 2021, we designed what we call Better Together. And that's really an opportunity for your JCC to select a specific IsraAID field project. That might be, for example, a child-friendly space in Colombia or Mozambique, or one of our water programs, one of our COVID-19 response programs, etc. And really involve your community around that through various fundraising opportunities and also speakers and live updates from the field. So happy to share any of that. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram and sign up for our newsletter to receive more updates. And here is my email, which I will add to the chat as well. And again, thank you all. And if there are any other questions, follow up, I'm happy to answer those as well.
So thank you, Rachel. Before we open it up to questions, I just want to add a little bit from my experience. You know, we always talk about, Rachel, do you mind? Okay, thank you. So we always talk about, you know, bringing Israel to our GCCs and the challenges of bringing Israel to our GCCs. You know, there's a GCC message, there are 70 faces to Israel. It's more than the politics, it's more than faith issues and other stuff. You know more than I do that tikkun olam is one of the best ways to connect to Israel. And what IsraAID is doing basically is, I don't know that there's a person in the world that could not relate to the great wonders of IsraAID. And the fact that you could bring their work, their contributions, their methods of engaging local people from all backgrounds and all faiths together to work for one cause together. I think that that's a beautiful message, and that's a beautiful way to bring Israel to your JCCs. It's, you know, it's sort of like Israel in the back door. It's not a session about Israel per se, but obviously when you talk about what IsraAID is doing, people get to say, oh my God, Israel is so much more than what I thought. Israel is so much more than what I see on TV. Israel is so much more than what's, you know, broadcasted. And it's engaging to young people, and it's engaging to older people. So that's, you know, I was walking one of the days I was invited to talk at the Peninsula JCC in the Bay Area, and I was walking through the doors and I saw there through their lobby, I saw a beautiful exhibit of IsraAID photography from, you know, we've seen here Rachel's beautiful slides. They have a beautiful collection of images and photos taken from all over the world. And when people walk through the doors of the GCC, you know, many of our GCCs have a collection of different exhibits. It could be art exhibits or other stuff. Can you imagine that people walk in and see these images that are not particularly Jewish when you walk in, or they're definitely not Israel, but then people, you know, they get to stop and say, oh my God, what is this about? And then they read, like, you know, there's a plaque or something telling you what the story behind, and they're amazed and they're intrigued and they want to do more and they want to find out more. Many of our GCCs have already worked with IsraAID, and I can tell that the feedback so far is excellent. And we're talking about GCCs from all sizes that have really enjoyed either bringing speakers in person, so they either fly in the speakers or via Zoom, or the exhibits or training, or what have you. If you want to plan a delegation, if you have really excited board members that would like to visit one of those refugee camps and, you know, to be part of doing something greater and bigger, that's also a possibility. I was with a group of GCC board members, as I mentioned, in Greece. So any questions, any thoughts that you would like to share and ask Rachel?
Thank you. Thank you for that really beautiful conclusion, Leah. I really can't echo that enough. And also the response I get also is that this is a very unique way to showcase Israel and the values and the culture and the incredible expertise that comes from the country, together with tikkun olam. Oh, you're welcome. And so, yeah, we'd be happy to, we'd love to work with you all after today's session, and we're very proud of all we've done with other JCCs.
So I have a thought, Rachel.
Sure.
We have here representatives from, as I mentioned, we have Canada, and we have here people from West and from East and from South, the United States. Do you know, do you have a list of people who've been involved with IsraAID as volunteers from communities? I mean, I could imagine that maybe Donna from San Diego, if she knows that so-and-so from San Diego has been involved, maybe they invite this person. So there's a local catch here. There's someone from the community. Do you have that list?
We do. Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'll zoom in more on it now. So we have a fantastic group of ambassadors, of speakers from really cities across the United States, even Canada, who have been with us really all over the world. So for example, San Diego, I'll just give one example. We actually used to have an incredible, before the pandemic, we were running a university student fellowship, and we would send students to the field and they would come back and essentially be ambassadors for us on campus. So San Diego, for example, we have an excellent student leader from San Diego who was with us in Puerto Rico. And she was able to share a lot of her personal experiences working with IsraAID, her contributions, and bring, you know, the work back to local communities. And that's really what we're trying to do here in the US office. That's really a key piece of our mission, is to raise awareness about these Israeli contributions that IsraAID is able to make all over the world, because at least from what I've seen, they don't get enough publicity. So San Diego is one example, but yes, we have people who really from all over the US.
By the way, from San Diego, Gary Jacobs from San Diego, our GCC Association board chair, has been with me in Lesbos with his wife, who's Jerry Ann. So I know that they're big advocates for IsraAID.
Amazing.
Any other question or thought to share with Rachel? So you have Rachel's email address. You are welcome to reach out to her directly following the conference. And I really urge you to take the beauty of IsraAID and share with your community, because there's great thing that you could do with them. And now I will thank you, Rachel, so much for this wonderful presentation. You're wonderful to work with, and no surprise, because anyone and everyone at IsraAID is so wonderful and so delightful. So thank you for everything that you're doing for the Jewish world. Toda rabba, and I'll just I'll turn it now over to Gabby to share a little bit about what's next for ProCon.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Rachel, again. This was truly outstanding and inspiring. It is so reassuring to know that there are great organizations like IsraAID that are truly making the world a better place daily. And I can actually speak to that personally, because I remember in October 2012, when Hurricane Sandy hit here in New York, IsraAID was there to help with cleanup. My family was hit really hard out on the Rockaways and Long Island, and I remember that logo vividly. So Rachel, thank you, and thank you, IsraAID, for sharing your unbelievable work through most challenging times, always first on the go with no hesitance or political reservations. So again, toda rabba. Please note again that Rachel's contact information is in the chat box, and you're welcome to follow up with her directly. That's rwallace@israaid.org. And then, yes, so I do have some general pro-con announcements. Our colleagues are our best teachers from 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 to 2 Pacific Time today. Join us for the JCC Excellence Showcase. In each 30-minute session, your colleagues will share JCC initiatives in programming, staff recruiting and retention, visionary management, or marketing and media, offering a great opportunity to learn about initiatives that can be replicated in your JCC community. Find more information and links to the sessions in SpotMe. And a quick reminder that the virtual vendor hall will be open again tomorrow, Thursday, April 29th from 1:45 to 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time. During this time, sponsors will be available for live, engaging, and informative video breakouts. You'll see product demos and have an opportunity to ask questions about how vendors, products, and services can best help your JCC. And again, thank you all for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Good night. Rachel. Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. You're wonderful. You're a
Thank
delight to
you.
work with.
Mutual feelings. Thank you. Really.
Thank you, Gabby. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye. It was really great, Rachel. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.